In the year 1842, deep in the heart of Georgia's cotton empire, one woman ruled her land like a queen without a king. Her name was Elelena Whitfield, and her plantation stretched farther than the eye could see, rows of white cotton glimmering under the southern sun. But behind those grand white columns and polite Sunday smiles, Elena was hiding an idea that would stain her family's name forever. When her husband Thomas Whitfield died suddenly of fever, Elena inherited everything, the land, the money, and over 200 enslaved souls. The neighbors whispered that no woman should run such a vast estate alone. But Elena didn't listen. She believed the Whitfields were destined for greatness, that their blood was stronger, purer, chosen by God, and so she made it her mission to keep that power alive, even if it meant bending every law of nature and morality to do it. Every night she would sit by the fire in her husband's study, staring at his old ledgers and a cracked portrait of her 5 daughters. Each one was beautiful, tall, and pale, but Elena saw something missing. "They have my grace," she would whisper, "but not his strength." To her, strength meant control, power, dominance, and soon she became obsessed with finding a way to improve her bloodline. Life on the Whitfield plantation ran like a clock, at least on the surface. The enslaved worked from dawn until the cicadas fell silent at dusk. Overseers shouted, the cotton gins clattered, and Elena watched from her balcony, cold and still as marble. Among the workers, there was one man who stood out, a man named Josiah. He was taller than any other, strong-shouldered and silent, with a gaze that could cut through stone. He had been sold from Virginia years ago, educated just enough to read the Bible, and known for his strange calm, the kind that made overseers uneasy. When Elena first saw him, it wasn't through lust or pity, it was calculation. She said nothing that day, but her eyes lingered longer than they should have. That night, the servants whispered about the mistress's new interest. "Miss Eleanor been asking about that tall one," said an old woman named Ruth. Another shook her head. "Ain't no good come when a lady stares too long at one of us," but the rumors didn't stop. By the next month, Elena had ordered the overseer to move Josiah closer, give him lighter work, bring him near the main house. She said it was because he was reliable, but everyone on the plantation knew nothing Elena Whitfield did was ever without reason. Late one evening, as the house slept, Elena stood by her mirror, staring at her reflection, her once youthful beauty fading beneath candlelight. Her eldest daughter, Marian, would soon turn 17, the same age Elena was when she first married. That night she whispered to herself, "The Whitfield name must not fade. I will build a stronger line." A perfect line. She reached for her husband's old portrait, tracing his face with trembling fingers. "You failed to give me a son," she murmured, "but I will finish what you started." The plan was forming, dark, forbidden, and unholy. The next morning, Josiah was ordered to the main house. He stood before Elena, sweat glistening on his skin after a long day in the fields. She looked him over with quiet intensity, then said simply, "From now on, you'll work under my direction. The overseer will report to me." Josiah nodded, but didn't speak. Behind his calm eyes something flickered, suspicion or fear. Outside, the wind swept through the cotton fields, carrying whispers the house couldn't contain. The servants began to talk, and the overseer avoided the mistress's gaze, because everyone on the Whitfield plantation knew one thing certain: when Elena Whitfield set her mind on something, she never stopped, not until she got it. The tall man she chose becomes part of a plan no one could have imagined. What began as an obsession will turn into something darker and deadlier. Subscribe, like, and share if you're ready for next chapter of the Georgia Widow's Experiment. Last time we met Elena Whitfield, the widow who ruled her Georgia plantation like a kingdom, but now her obsession with creating a perfect bloodline has led her to one man, a tall, quiet, enslaved worker named Josiah. No one knew exactly what widow intended, but the way she looked at him, everyone knew it wasn't mercy. The summer of 1843 was the hottest anyone could remember. The air itself felt heavy, like it was holding its breath on a morning thick with humidity. Elena summoned Josiah to the veranda. She sat in her high-back chair, a lace fan moving slowly in her hand, her daughters watching from behind the curtains. "You are Josiah?" she said softly. "Yes, ma'am," he answered, eyes down. "I've heard you're strong, obedient, capable of hard work." He nodded once, then she leaned forward, her voice sharp but calm. "From today, you'll be working near the house. I'll have tasks for you personally. You'll do them exactly as I say." To anyone listening, it sounded like a promotion, but to Josiah, it felt like a warning. That night, as the cicadas screamed from the fields, Josiah sat outside the cabin he shared with 3 others. He didn't speak much, but the others noticed his silence had turned heavy. Ruth, the older house servant, came by with a bowl of stew. "They say Mistress got plans for you," she whispered. "You best be careful, boy. Ain't no safety in a white woman's favor." Josiah said nothing, but inside he remembered his time in Virginia when he'd been sold away from his wife and child. He'd sworn never to be used again, yet here he was, chosen not for kindness, but for something he didn't yet understand. The next week, Elena ordered Josiah to fix the roof near the parlor. From her balcony, she watched as he climbed, sweat glistening on his back. Her eldest daughter, Mary Ann, came beside her. "Mama, why are you watching him?" Elena didn't turn her head. "Our mother must choose carefully, my dear. The future of this house depends on strength, not softness." Marianne's face tightened. She didn't fully understand, but something in her mother's tone chilled her. That night, she overheard the servants whispering, and when she realized what her mother's plan truly was, she couldn't sleep. A week later, Elena ordered Josiah to serve wine at the family dinner, an unusual demand. The daughters sat silently while their mother's eyes lingered too long. "Strong hands," Elena said aloud, watching him pour. "Hands that could shape destiny." Marianne dropped her spoon. The youngest, Clara, stared wide-eyed at her mother. After dinner, Elena dismissed everyone except Josiah. The hallway fell silent. The daughters listening from the stairs heard the sound of slow footsteps, the creak of a door closing. Then nothing. From that night on, Josiah became a shadow in the big house. He fixed doors, carried wood, repaired walls, always near the mistress, never far from her sight. The daughters stopped speaking at dinner. Servants stopped laughing in the kitchen. Even the overseer avoided the veranda now, and every night Elena would sit in her husband's chair and write in a black leather journal. On one page she had written in neat, perfect handwriting, "The new Whitfield line will rise from strength. My daughters will bear greatness." One night Josiah tried to speak. "Ma'am, I mean no disrespect, but this, whatever you ask of me, it's not right." Elena's face hardened. "You will do as I say, Josiah. You owe your life to this house. You belong to it, every part of you." He looked at her then, not as a slave, but as a man stripped of everything except his will. "No, ma'am," he said quietly. "No one owns my soul." That single sentence hung in the air like thunder. From that night onward, Elena watched him differently, not with curiosity, but with fury. The next morning, the overseer was ordered to keep Josiah under closer watch, but the whispers had already begun spreading across the county. A widow, a slave, and a plan so unnatural, even the other planters pretended not to know. By the end of that summer, every soul on the Whitfield estate knew something terrible was coming. Elena's obsession turns toward her own daughters, and when she forces them to obey her twisted plan, the Whitfield legacy will begin to crumble. Subscribe, like, and share. Continue the true story-inspired saga of the Georgia widow's experiment. The summer sun had begun to fade earlier each evening, and the Whitfield plantation seemed quieter than ever before. Yet beneath that silence, something dark was spreading, like rot under polished wood. Elena Whitfield's eyes had lost their warmth, if she ever had any. Her every word now carried weight. Her every decision seemed calculated. Her every glance toward Josiah heavy with intent. The servants spoke less. The daughters avoided their mother's gaze. Even the house itself seemed to hold its breath. Marianne, the eldest, was the only one who dared to question her. She had begun to sense what her mother was planning, and the thought of it made her sick with dread. One night, as the candles flickered in the drawing room, Marianne tried to speak. "Mother," she said softly, "the things you're asking of him and of us, they're not right." Elena didn't even look up from her writing desk. Her pen continued to move across the page, steady as her heartbeat. "What is right," she said, "is what preserves the Whitfield name, what keeps our blood strong." Marianne stepped closer, but at what cost? That made Eleanor pause. She turned, her pale face glowing in the candle light. "At any cost, child, the world takes what it wants from the weak. I will not have weakness in my house." Marianne's throat tightened. For the first time in her life, she was afraid of her own mother. The next morning, Elena called her daughters into the parlor. The air was thick with humidity, the smell of magnolia flowers seeping in through the open doors. Josiah stood silently near the veranda, his eyes lowered, but his mind elsewhere. "My dears," Elena began, "you are my pride, my life's purpose. But this family must endure long after I am gone. You must understand that we are chosen for something greater, something the world will never understand." Her second daughter, Louise, spoke nervously. "Mama, people are already talking," the preacher's wife said. Eleanor's voice snapped like a whip. "And the preacher's wife is a fool. Let her talk. She knows nothing of destiny." The younger girls exchanged frightened glances. They had always obeyed her, always believed she knew best. But now even they could see something in her eyes that no longer looked like faith. It looked like madness. That night, the eldest sisters couldn't sleep. Marianne sat at her window, staring at the dark fields, listening to the sound of the cicadas. She could see Josiah walking alone, his figure outlined by the moonlight. When the house finally fell quiet, she crept down the stairs. Outside, the air was heavy and alive with the sound of night. She called his name in a whisper. "Josiah." He stopped but didn't turn. "She's not well," Marianne said, her voice trembling. "She's losing herself." Josiah looked at her then, his face calm, but filled with something deep and weary. "I know," he said, "but she won't stop until someone makes her." Marianne's eyes filled with tears. "Then she'll destroy us all." From that night forward, Marianne avoided her mother, but Elena noticed. The widow had become sharper, crueler, more suspicious. She began keeping the girls close, never letting them walk alone, never allowing them to speak privately. Every decision she made was now about control. She had the girls measured for new dresses, all white, all matching. She said it was for a family portrait, but none of them believed her. And Josiah, he was trapped between two worlds. He was watched constantly, ordered to work only near the main house. He knew escape was impossible now, not when Elena had made him the center of her twisted vision. One evening, as the sky turned a deep orange, Elena called Marianne into the study. On the desk lay her black leather journal, its pages filled with neat handwriting. "Read it," she said. Marianne hesitated, then opened the book. Her mother's words stared back at her. "A new line must begin. My daughters shall carry it. Josiah will be the vessel of renewal." Her hands began to shake. "Mother, you can't mean this." Elena stood, her face pale and cold. "It's already begun," she said quietly. "The Whitfields will not be forgotten." Marianne backed away, her voice breaking. "You're destroying us." Elena's expression didn't change. "No, my dear, I'm saving us." When Marianne fled the room, she ran straight to the servants' quarters. She found Ruth and whispered through tears, "She's gone mad. She'll use him. She'll use us all." Ruth placed a trembling hand on her shoulder. "Child," she said softly, "you best find a way out of this place. 'Cause your mama done sold her soul to the devil already." That night, thunder rolled over the plantation, and rain began to fall hard against the old white columns. Inside the great house, Elena Whitfield sat alone at her desk, writing one final line in her journal: "The seed is chosen. The future is near." If you want to know what happens when Josiah finally rebels against the widow's twisted plan, and how Marianne risks everything to stop her, stay tuned for Of the Georgia Widow's Experiment. Subscribe, like, and share to follow the next chapter of this haunting true history-inspired story. The rain that had soaked the Whitfield plantation lasted 3 days. When the sun returned, it felt like a different place, quiet, heavy, and changed. The workers in the field spoke in murmurs, afraid their words might travel through the air and reach the mistress's ears. The overseer avoided the main house altogether, claiming, "Miss Whitfield don't need a man to tell her what's right anymore." But by then, everyone knew the truth. Something was wrong inside that mansion. Elena Whitfield had stopped attending church. Her daughters no longer visited town. The preacher came once to call on them. He left pale and silent, his Bible clutched tight to his chest, and Josiah, the tall man at the heart of the whispers, had become a ghost moving through the estate. The men respected him, the women pied him, and the mistress watched him like a hawk. He'd learned to keep his eyes low, his mouth shut, and his spirit buried deep. But inside, something was starting to burn. One night, as the moonlight spilled through the tall windows of the big house, Marian slipped quietly into the study. The black leather journal lay open on the desk, as if waiting for her. She read her mother's latest entry, written in perfect ink. The blood must mix, the line must be renewed. I'm chosen to make it so. Marianne felt the room tilt around her. She pressed her hand over her mouth to stop from crying out. She didn't notice her mother standing in the doorway. Elena's voice came sharp and cold. You've been reading what doesn't belong to you. Marianne turned, her heart hammering. What you're doing is madness. Her mother walked closer, candle light flickering across her face. Madness, she said softly. What purpose? You're too young to understand what it means to build something that lasts. Marianne stepped back. You can't use him, Mother. He's a man, not an animal. Elena's hand struck her across the face before she could finish. The slap echoed through the house. Enough, Elena hissed. You will do as I say. You will obey. Marianne's eyes filled with tears, not from pain, but from the horror of realizing that her mother truly believed she was doing God's work. That night, she ran to the servant quarters, desperate. She found Josiah sitting alone, sharpening an old blade used for cutting cane. She won't stop, Marianne whispered. She's lost her mind. She means to force this abomination on all of us. Josiah looked up slowly. I know, Marianne hesitated. Then we have to leave, he shook his head. They'd hunt us. A man like me don't get to just walk away. But if we stay, she said, she'll destroy everyone. My sisters, you. Josiah looked at her with a quiet sorrow. Then maybe it's time someone stopped her. For a long moment neither of them spoke. The night was thick with crickets and distant thunder. Then Marianne said softly, if you try, she'll kill you. Josiah gave a faint, sad smile. Maybe, but at least I'll die standing. The next morning, rumors began to spread beyond the plantation. A trader in Mon said he'd heard strange things about the Whitfield widow, that she'd lost her senses and was mixing gods, bloodlines. Others whispered that the family was cursed. Neighbors began to avoid her road. Even the mailboy stopped delivering letters, but Elena seemed untouched by shame. She carried herself higher than ever, her hair pinned perfectly, her eyes burning with certainty. When one of her daughters cried during supper, she calmly told her, tears are for weak. We are chosen for something greater. That night, she ordered the servants to prepare the parlor for a ceremony. Candles were lit, the curtains drawn. The girls were made to wear their white dresses. Josiah was called to the main hall. When he entered, the silence was suffocating. Elena stood before the great door, her daughters trembling behind her. She said softly, it's time, but before she could continue, Marianne stepped forward. No, Mother, she said, this ends tonight. The old woman's lips tightened. You forget yourself. Marianne raised her voice, her hands shaking. You forget God. You forget decency, humanity, everything Father stood for. For a moment, Elena looked stunned. Then her voice turned to steel. You will obey me. I won't. Josiah moved, then slow and deliberate, placing himself between the mother and daughter. His voice was low but firm. This house ain't holy, ma'am, and your God wouldn't want this. Elena's hand trembled, her jaw clenched. You dare speak to me of God? But Josiah didn't move, his eyes locked on hers, calm, steady, defiant. Something in that look broke her. For the first time, Elena Whitfield looked uncertain. The candle light flickered, and in that flicker, the daughters saw the woman who had raised them. Once proud, now consumed by her own obsession. No one moved, no one breathed, and outside, thunder rolled again, as if the heavens themselves were listening. Josiah reaches his breaking point. The night of escape begins, and the Whitfield legacy begins to crumble in blood and fire. Subscribe, like, and share to follow the next chapter of the Georgia Widow's experiment. The rain came back that night, harder than before, battering the old plantation like a warning from heaven. lightning flashed across the sky, lighting up the columns of the Whitfield mansion. Inside, the candles still burned from the failed ceremony. The wax dripped onto the floor, the air heavy with smoke and silence. Josiah stood in the hallway, his heart pounding. Upstairs, he could hear Elena's voice, low, furious, trembling with something between anger and madness. "She's corrupted them," she hissed. "My own daughter has turned them against me." Marianne was locked in her room. Her sisters cried quietly behind their doors. Josiah knew then if he waited until morning, someone would die. He went to the back stairs where shadows were thick. In the servant quarters, a few men looked up when he entered. They saw the look in his eyes and said nothing. He whispered, "It's time tonight." They hesitated. Everyone knew the punishment for running. But then an older woman, her hands rough from the washboard, said softly, "I'll help. The Lord's done waiting on this place." They moved quickly, silent as ghosts. In the barn, they gathered what little they could: bread, a jug of water, and an old lantern with barely any oil. Josiah cut the rope on one of the horses, whispering to Comet. In her room, Marianne sat at the window, the rain streaking down the glass. She heard the faint creak of the back door below, and her heart leapt. She tore at her door's latch, whispering, "Please, please don't wake her." It finally gave way. She ran barefoot down the hall, her nightgown brushing the floor. Josiah was at the door, soaked, lantern in hand. Their eyes met in the dark. "You came," he said softly. "I wasn't staying," she whispered. "Not after what she's done." From upstairs, a floorboard creaked. Elena's voice called out faint but sharp. "Marianne, where are you?" They froze. The thunder cracked, loud and violent. Then Josiah grabbed her hand. "Now," he said. They bolted into the rain. The wind howled through the trees, the path slick with mud. Behind them, a window burst open. Elena's scream tore through the storm. "Traitor, both of you." The sound of her voice was swallowed by the thunder, but they both heard the rage in it. They ran past the fields, the wet stalks slapping their legs until the house was just a dim shape in the distance. Josiah turned once and saw the mansion lit up in flashes of lightning, like a ghost watching them leave. But escape was never simple. By dawn, the dogs were released. The overseer, red faced and shouting, rode out with 2 men. They carried rifles and followed the muddy prints toward the woods. Marianne could barely keep up. Her feet were bleeding, her gown torn. Josiah slowed just enough to steady her. "We're close," he whispered. "There's a river ahead. If we cross it, we can hide in the cypress." But they never made it that far. The dogs found them first, their howls echoing through the forest. Josiah spun around, pulling Marianne behind a fallen tree. He could see the torch light flickering through the rain. "Stay down," he said. The first shot rang out, splintering bark inches from his head. Josiah didn't wait. He lifted the fallen branch like a weapon and moved toward the light. Marianne cried out, "No." But he was already gone. There was shouting, another gunshot, and then silence. She waited, trembling, her hands over her mouth. Minutes passed. Then through the trees, she saw a shape limping toward her. Josiah, blood on his arm, his shirt torn, but still standing. He fell to his knees beside her, breathing hard. "It's done," he whispered. "We got to go before more come." They stumbled onward until they reached the riverbank. The water was high and violent, rushing with the force of the storm. Marianne looked at him terrified. "We can't cross that." Josiah stared at the raging current. "Don't got a choice." He took her hand again, and together they stepped into the freezing water. The current pulled at their legs. The rain stung their faces, but they didn't let go. Behind them, the torches reached the tree line. Voices shouted through the wind. Marianne looked back one last time. In a flash of lightning, she saw her mother standing at the edge of the woods, black cloak whipping in the wind. Elena Whitfield didn't move. She just watched, her eyes hollow, her face pale as marble, and then in the roar of the river and the thunder of heaven, her children vanished into dark water. The rain washed the footprints away. By morning the plantation stood silent again. A grand house with no laughter, no songs, no prayers. Just one woman sitting alone at the window, staring toward the river that had taken everything she tried to control. The curse of Whitfield House. Rumors spread across Georgia that the widow's mansion is haunted. Locals say they still hear screams in the rain. subscribe, like, and share to follow the chilling conclusion of the Georgia widow's experiment. The storm had passed by morning. The sky over Georgia was gray and low, the air heavy with the smell of wet earth and ash. The Whitfield plantation stood in silence. No servants in the yard, no sound of hooves, no voices calling across the fields, just the wind creaking through the shutters and the crows circling above. Inside, Elelena Whitfield sat at the grand dining table, her hair undone, her dress still stained from the night before. The candles had burned out hours ago, leaving only streaks of wax down the polished wood. Her daughters huddled upstairs, terrified to come down. They had seen their mother's face when she returned, pale as death, eyes empty, her lips whispering the same words again and again, "They're gone, they're gone." No one dared speak to her. The servants who hadn't fled stayed out of sight, crossing themselves when her footsteps echoed through the hall. By dusk, word had spread to the nearby farms. 2 riders had seen shapes in the river. A man and a woman swept away by the current near the swamp bend. Their bodies were never found. The preacher returned the next day, riding slow, Bible in hand. He found Elena on the porch, staring toward the woods. "Mrs. Whitfield," he said softly. "You should rest." She didn't look at him. Her voice was distant, cracked. "I built something that was meant to last, and the Lord took it." The preacher hesitated. "You built something the Lord never asked for." Her head turned sharply then, eyes blazing for the first time in days. "You know nothing of what I built," she spat. "I tried to save us, so to purify what was dying." He took a step back, crossing himself. "You tried to play guard, ma'am, and that never ends well." When he left, she didn't watch him go. She just sat there whispering to the wind. That night, thunder rolled again, distant this time, echoing like memory. The girls said they heard footsteps in the hallway, soft and slow. One of them swore she saw the tall shadow of a man pass by her door. Another claimed to hear her sister's name being whispered from the garden. By morning, Elena's bed was empty. They searched the house, the barns, the woods, nothing. Only her old Bible lay open on the table. A single line underlined in red ink: "Be not deceived. God is not mocked." After that day, no one lived long at Whitfield House. 10 years later, travelers passing through said the windows were always open, though no one lived there. Local children dared each other to run up and touch the door, but most wouldn't go near after sunset. Farm hands said they heard weeping on rainy nights, and sometimes a man's voice calling from the river. The house changed hands 3 times. Each new owner tried to make it a home again, but each left within a year. Some said their livestock died without reason. Others claimed to see a pale woman standing by the upstairs window when lightning struck. One night, a young woman from town wandered too close. She later swore she saw a figure, tall, broad-shouldered, standing by the old oak tree, his skin glistening as if still wet from rain. He turned, looked right at her, and vanished when she blinked. Word spread. People stopped taking that road after dark. The Whitfield property was left to rot, swallowed by vines and silence. By the time the Civil War came, the mansion was little more than a ghost. Soldiers camped near it once and fled by morning, saying they'd heard screams from the walls, and so the story became legend. They said the widow still walks the halls searching for her daughters. They said the daughters still call for the man who tried to save them. And they said, on nights when the river floods, you can still see 2 shapes standing at its edge, a tall man and a young woman, hand in hand, looking back toward the house that damned them all. No one knows if it's true, but if you go to Georgia and you find a road lined with oak trees and old white stones, listen closely. When the rain begins, you might hear a woman whispering through the thunder, "The blood must mix." And if you hear that, run the story of pride, obsession, and the curse left behind. If you felt the chill of history tonight, like, share, and subscribe for more forgotten stories the world tried to bury.